Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, we have back a repeat guest, John Richardson, expatriation law. He's an expert in the issues that impact Americans living abroad, specifically taxation of Americans abroad. John, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Pretty well, pretty well. Yeah, we haven't talked for, I don't know, what, a half a year or something?
I think this is the fourth one, maybe the third, maybe the fourth.
Yeah.
And we wanted to get back together because there's been some recent developments with an organization that you are a part of. The acronym is SEAT, which is the let me do this again. The Stop Extraterritorial American Taxation Organization, SEAT, SEAT. And you guys basically advocate for eliminating or changing the extraterritorial taxation laws that impact American citizens and citizenship-based taxation. And tell us about the latest developments there.
Yeah, well, you make it sound more comprehensive than it is. I mean, as you know, the U.S. employs this citizenship taxation model that means that, any U.S. citizen, even if they don't live in the United States, is subject to the U.S. extraterritorial regime that includes taxation. And the mission of SEED has been to A, provide education on the problems of it, and B, to get it changed, meaning to eliminate citizenship as a criterion for U.S. tax residency. And the good news is that Republicans overseas has seen the wisdom on that, actually has seen the wisdom for many years, and is advocating that position. In other words, no more taxing U.S. citizens wherever they live in the world just because of their citizenship.
Mhm. And I didn't read the full thing, but it's like you're trying to present before Congress, or it's picking up steam in some way. Tell us about that.
Well, okay, so SEED is a relatively new organization. I think it was formed about 4 years ago. But the Republican Party has been around forever, and Republicans overseas has been around for a long time. And Republicans overseas, although it's not widely known, which I think is a mistake, has been very, very active in advocating getting rid of the problems associated with citizenship taxation. For example, in 2014, they launched the first lawsuit against FATCA in the United States. It was called Stop FATCA, whatever it was called. Interestingly, it was dismissed for standing issues. Very, very difficult to sue the U.S. government. Every time you sue them, their first response will be, well, you don't have the right to sue us. In 2017, there were House hearings into FATCA, and Republicans overseas, actually did manage to organize that and played a lead role. In 2018, Republicans overseas played a major, major role in Representative Holding's bill to at least improve the situation of citizenship taxation. And after the election, there's going to be major tax change in the U.S., if for no other reason, but a lot of the 2017 Tax Jobs and Cuts Act provisions will be expiring. So this is a good opportunity to advance the cause of ending this citizenship tax regime. That's exactly what they're doing. Specifically, they have the Heritage Foundation is sort of collecting and consolidating proposals, and this is one of them.
Okay. And what do you think's like the legit chance that we can actually see some change here? Because one thing is to advocate for it. I'm sure lots of Americans living abroad, would love to see some change. But what's the chance we actually see something happen? Has there been any whispering, among the American government that they're willing to mix things up here?
Um, Well, among the American government, what do you mean by that? You mean Congress, you mean Treasury, you mean Ways and Means Committee, you mean Senate Finance, I mean, it's like the US government's a bunch of ants, right? Uh,
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a coordination between various departments, right? I don't, where would it start, I guess?
well, so there's three ways to attack the problem of citizenship taxation, and the RO proposal incorporates all three. So the first is a legislative proposal, and the legislative proposal is simple in theory, and it's simply, right now the Internal Revenue Code says every individual is subject to U.S. worldwide taxation unless you can prove you're a non-resident alien. And that's fairly broad. So the congressional fix would be to change that to every U.S. resident is subject to worldwide taxation. And that involves various changes to the Internal Revenue Code, obviously. So that's the legislative fix. Also, I mean, most of these tax laws don't even come from the Internal Revenue Code. They come from Treasury regulations because a section in the Internal Revenue Code would typically give Treasury, that is the IRS, the authorization to make a regulation. So this can also be fixed through a regulatory fix. Right now, the relevant regulation defines individual to be a citizen or a resident. And our view is that the regulation could simply define individual to be a resident. And about 4 years ago, along with other seat members, Karen Alpert and Laura Snyder, I wrote a paper called Regulatory Fix for Citizenship Taxation, which explores all this. And I mean, it's widely available online as long as you look for it. So that would be the second one. And the third aspect of this is to take the position that this can be changed through tax treaties by eliminating or not applying what's called the saving clause to Americans abroad. The saving clause is a provision of all U.S. tax treaties that incredibly say that, hey, yeah, there may be benefits to this tax treaty, but U.S. citizens are deprived of most of the benefits. So, interestingly, many tax preparers will say to you, well, the treaty prevents double taxation. I mean, that is an absolutely outrageous distortion of reality. Because as a general principle, the saving clause means that U.S. citizens don't get the benefit of treaties. So, if anything, the treaties tend to reinforce double taxation.
Right.
But fortunately, it's the Internal Revenue Code that has the foreign tax credit provisions and things like that. So, it's really this proposal is attacking this problem in all three of these ways. What are the chances? Well, one can never know what the chances are. I mean, you just roll this stuff out and do what you can with it.
And has
But
anyone,
the
like any
thing is,
congressman, picked up your cause a little bit and said, like, yeah, this makes sense?
well, various Congress people, men, whatever, have actually, coincidentally, men, yes, but people over the years have. At the present time, for example, Senator Congressman Byer of Virginia has his own sort of proposed legislation. It doesn't go far enough. But the point is that that's somebody who recognizes this is a clear problem. Before his retirement, Congressman Holding recognized this as a clear problem. So there are members of Congress who do recognize it as a problem. And it becomes a question, I think, of, generally raising awareness with them, et cetera. But, understand this, that it's very likely that 2025 will be another year of massive, massive tax reform that doesn't happen very often. So, you're going to see all kinds of proposals in the mix. So it's not like this is going to be considered, I think, as a standalone bill or anything, right? I mean, it's going to be part of the general tax reforms that are considered.
Okay. And I understand there's a group called Republicans Overseas that are involved. I've heard that the Democrats overseas, or the whatever they're called, is like significantly bigger. Are we seeing sort of bipartisan support for this, or is this a very Republican-led charge?
Well, and let's unpack what you said there. So, Democrats abroad, uh, and getting even more granular, the Democrats Abroad Tax Committee are subset, it's a subset of the Democratic Party generally. It would be a small, very small part of it. And, the Republican Party has Republicans Overseas, which is definitely a smaller organization. And they have their own sort of tax committee as well, right? So we have Republicans Overseas Tax Committee, Democrats Abroad Tax Committee. I would say that obviously, both, well, in fact, anybody, including individuals, would be committed to the view that this whole, U.S. citizenship taxation thing is a big, big problem. Uh, as it currently stands, though, and there are various ideas for how to solve this as a problem. Now, the basic problem here is, although the way U.S. citizens abroad are taxed by the U.S. government, which is very punitive generally and
Mhm.
far worse than the way resident Americans are taxed, is not actually the problem. Okay, it's an expression or a feature of the problem or a consequence of the problem. The problem is that Americans abroad, meaning U.S. citizens who don't live in the United States, the real problem is they're subject to U.S. tax jurisdiction at all. Okay,
Mhm.
like why should somebody who doesn't live in the United States be subject to the rules in the Internal Revenue Code? They don't live in the United States, right? So my view and Seat's view and the view of Republicans overseas is that you solve the problem by changing the law or the regulation so that individual U.S. citizens who do not live in the United States are no longer subject to the Internal Revenue Code, right? Which we use the cluster of words severing citizenship from tax residency.
Mhm.
Now, that is the goal of Republicans overseas, generally in the tax committee in particular. So we compare that to Democrats abroad. That does not appear to be their immediate goal, right? Or at least they're not articulating in that way of severing citizenship from tax residency, or at least that's not an immediate goal. Their work seems to be focused more around not ending the fact that individual U.S. citizens are subject to the Internal Revenue Code at all, but trying to make their way they're subject to the Internal Revenue Code a little bit better, right? In other
Mhm.
words, examples might be, increase the foreign earned income exclusion, or, reduce the number of forms they should file, or something like that, right? But I think that generally, and I'm not being critical of anything here, I'm just answering your question the way I see it, because I do think ultimately it's very important, to
Mhm.
get unanimity among individuals abroad and their groups. But at the present time, I think really it's only Seat and Republicans overseas that are kind of, trying to extract the cancerous tumor, namely, U.S. Get sever citizenship from tax residency. Citizenship had nothing to do with this, right? As
Mhm.
opposed to, well, we're stuck with citizenship taxation. It's the American way. Let's just try to make it a little more tolerable for people. Does that make sense to you?
It does, and I think there's kind of, in one way, two groups of Americans, and I noticed that the SEAT organization seems to be basically people who've been living abroad their whole lives. So someone who was maybe born in France to American parents, or born in Australia to American parents. And so for them, they feel, I guess, further away from the United States. And then it's a whole different thing. People who are maybe who grew up in the US and now they're living abroad and they're living in Mexico, but they really kind of grew up in the US. And it seems like a lot of the people who are pushing this initiative are people who literally have lived their whole lives more or less outside the US, and they just happen to have the passport from their parents, and they're like, what the hell is going on? This is really unfair. Is that accurate?
I think you're definitely on the right track there. Let me sort of rein that in a little bit. I don't think you're wrong, but I think that it's more the consequences of the circumstances you're describing. So if you have, I mean, obviously somebody who's never lived in the United States, or you have somebody who's lived their full adult life outside the United States, what you have are people where their whole financial center of gravity, earning, investments, retirement planning, would
Mhm.
be in accordance with the laws of another country, right? I mean, you grew up in France, you grew up in Canada, the UK, what have you. You're going to be thinking about things like Canadian TFSA or UK ISA, this sort of stuff, right? And yeah, and then pension plans. I mean, if you have a pension plan or some kind of employee benefits thing, I mean, it's going to be tied into a non US employer. Now, for those people, because their financial center of gravity is completely outside the United States, they are affected incredibly negatively by a US tax code that is just
Mhm.
so hostile to anything that is non-US, so hostile to anything that is foreign. I
Right.
mean, like for those people that I've described, I mean, oh my God, if they try to be self-employed or have a business abroad, I mean, the consequences are simply unbelievable. Now, on the other side, uh, we talk about, the digital nomad type person, which I think what you mean by the Mexico thing, and others. The dividing line is that, and we've talked about this before, right? That those kinds of people, their financial center of gravity tends to be in the United States, right? I mean, they may be outside the United States temporarily or what have you, but they run their financial life more through the United States. So they don't feel the effects of this in the same way. I mean, either way, it's there's a moral aspect to this, and it is completely wrong, for the United States to be reaching into other countries, and trying to claim people as tax residents. But in terms of the feeling the pain, I would say, yeah, the dividing line really is where their center of financial gravity is. And if your
Mhm.
center of financial gravity is outside the United States, and those tend to be the people who you described as, living outside the United States for their whole lives, the pain is going to be a lot worse. And,
Mhm.
I think the perceived outrageousness of it is going to be a lot higher. But Vance, your very question, I think, reveals a real problem here. And that is to get a sort of a unified support for getting rid of these problems, right? Now, remember that something like Democrats Abroad is a US centric organization, right? Even though it's called abroad. I mean, the purpose of it is essentially, to, marshal voting, from outside the United States, etc. So
Mhm.
their, membership is largely going to be people who, still have connections to the United States. If they're temporarily outside the United States, they're clearly their financial center of gravity, their retirement planning is in the United States. That's not a good group to, really represent the interests of people who've lived long term outside the United States.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because as you mentioned, if you just live a life 100% separate from the United States, and your financial center of life is France or Australia, and you get a local job in France or Australia, and you hold your money in France or Australia, it's have businesses there. It's insanely complicated.
Well, it is because I think another problem in this whole discussion is that I have gradually seen the obvious. Sometimes the obvious is the hardest to see in life. But tax codes in the modern world are only peripherally about taxation. If you had a simple tax system like, say, Eritrea, and say, well, just give us a 2% excise tax on your income, people wouldn't like it, but there wouldn't be, the degree of despair over this thing. The problem is that in first world democracies, tax codes are not mainly about tax. They're about rewarding a certain kind of lifestyle, right? A certain
Mm,
saving for retirement or this or that. So the problem with
right.
what people call the citizenship taxation regime is that it's not really about taxation. It's about, being subject to a set of life rules imposed by a country that you don't even live in, right? And that's really what makes it impossible. And so to put another way, the people who see this as just a tax issue obviously don't understand what it really is.
Hmm. And what would be the ideal outcome here, from what your organization is trying to do, and this idea of, I guess, repealing or removing extraterritorial taxation? What's the best case scenario?
Well, there's only one case scenario that really solves the problem for all people, all the time, under all circumstances, and that is to completely sever citizenship from the definition of U.S. tax residency. In other words, one's citizenship, the fact that one was born in the United States is irrelevant to taxation. That it needs to shift over to a tax definition of residency based, well, just based on that residency. Do you have a physical financial connection to the United States that would justify a U.S. claim that you ought to be subject to their worldwide taxation regime? But I mean, there's nothing, strange or revolutionary about that. I mean, that just means the United States joins exactly what the rest of the world standard is. I mean, at
Hmm.
the present time, the rest of the world defines tax residency. How shall I put it, in terms of the circumstances of your life?
Hmm.
The United States, by using citizenship, defines tax residency in terms of the circumstances of your birth. I mean, I remember once President Obama, making this claim, basically the outcome of your life should never be determined by the circumstances of your birth, right? I mean, oh my God, what kind of nonsense is this? I mean, that's the whole basis of the U.S. tax system. So, bottom line, the outcome is just for the U.S. to behave like the rest of the world, which they should because of, all the mobility, from one place to another,
Hmm.
and assume tax jurisdiction based on the circumstances of people's lives, how they live their lives, and not based on the circumstances of their birth. Well, I was born a U.S. citizen, therefore I'm always subject to these laws, right? I mean, it's almost as though it's come full circle because a big part of people may even have forgotten that there was a war of 1812 between the United States and Britain. I mean, the issue was very much the same, and that Britain was claiming a U.S. residents as British citizens and, forcing them to serve on British warships.
Hey guys, quick break from the podcast to tell you about job stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltza, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now. Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. And I guess if we were to get our way and have citizenship divorced from taxation, they'd have to put in a set of laws in terms of how someone, what makes someone a tax resident and how someone could give up tax residency. Are you providing guidelines for that? Are you taking cues from
Yeah, well,
Canada
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, in a general sense. I mean, in your first point, what does it mean to be a tax resident? Well, I did another podcast this morning with somebody, and I sort of coined the phrase, what's that movie, 50 Shades of Grey? I called it 50 Shades of Tax Residency.
Okay.
What can that mean? And typically, the way tax residency is defined, although countries are not identical, we can use Canada as an example. I think Canada, right? It's a combination of, what's called deemed. I don't care what your life is, you're going to be a tax resident if you spend more than a certain number of days in a country. Most countries have that. In Canada, it's 183 days. In the US, you have, what's called a substantial presence test. And then you have something that's a little more, not as mechanical, but more substantive, which really has to do with, hey, where do you really live your life? Canada calls that ordinary residence, which is sort of, where's your family, where's your job,
Nice.
this sort of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, something like that. I think that probably our proposals, well, because I've written them, are based more on something like Canada's ordinary residency, because that's something that, I understand, have a lot of experience with. So yeah, the basic proposal would be something like that, right? Something closer to the Canadian system or the Australian system. And in the world as it stands today, unfortunately, more and more countries are adopting departure taxes, as I think you're aware, when you sever tax residency.
Exit tax.
Yeah, it's called an exit tax in the U.S. Other countries call them departure taxes, but it's a tax imposed at the time of severing tax residency. And I would expect that a proposal like this would include a provision like that, because the main objection would be, all right, so you're telling me that some billionaire can just move outside the country. This is the first thing they'll always say, and somehow cease to be a U.S. tax resident. The answer is, oh no, absolutely not. As in countries like Canada, Australia, they would pay a departure tax at that time when they move out. Which is usually includes sort of a deemed sale capital gains tax. The U.S. has something similar at the moment, although far more punitive. But because the U.S. defines citizenship in terms of, tax residency in terms of citizenship, what happens is the tax is triggered when people lose their citizenship, which can be years after they've left the United States. So the U.S. 877A exit tax typically goes after assets that were accumulated when somebody didn't even live in the United States. So a move to residency-based taxation would also align these kinds of departure taxes much better, with increase in asset values when the person actually lived in the country instead of outside the country.
And how can someone get involved if they want to be part of the advocating and making this happen?
Well, so I would say that SEAT at seatnow.org is sort of the the group that puts together the background thinking and organizing on this, and you can follow us at Seat Now .org. We made a decision in creating the organization to not accept donations, actually. Just thinking that it would be easier. And of course, I recognize, I'm not promoting any particular political party, but I would point out that it's the Republican Party and Republicans overseas that is really going for the jugular and taking the position that citizenship needs to be severed from tax residency. Now, I know a lot of your group is on Twitter, so I'll give you some Twitter handles, to keep up with this. Can, of course, follow me, Expatriation Law on Twitter, EXPATRIATION Law. You can follow SEAT on Twitter, SEATnow_org, SEATNOW_org. You can follow Republicans Overseas Tax, REP Overseas TAX. I would actually encourage you to follow Democrats Abroad Tax to see what they're doing as well. Although I don't think it's quite the same thing, but they're Dems Abroad Tax. So those are good ways to, follow what's going on. Now, in terms of getting involved, I think there are a lot of small things that can be done. One of them is from time to time, there are calls for people to complete surveys. Right now, Seat Now is conducting a major survey that you can find on the seatnow.org site. I encourage people to complete that. But sometimes there are calls for, submissions to U.S. Treasury, for example. And those are also very important. And there's a major one having to do with the foreign trust rules, which is just closed. But I mean, on August 21st, I actually will be in D.C. making a presentation, to Treasury on the unfairness of a lot of these rules. But, I can do that, right? Or somebody else can do it. But I can tell you it's a hell of a lot easier. At the moment, there are 1,500 Americans abroad. And by the way, hat tip to Democrats
1,500
organizing this, who've submitted comments to Treasury. It's a lot easier for me or somebody else to say, and by the way, I didn't invent this. You've got 1,600 comments in total, and 1,500 of them are from Americans abroad. So, these are things that can and should be done. Ultimately, I do believe that, this change will be successful. Maybe not right now, but it will be successful. But the necessary condition for success is for individuals and groups to get behind the goal that really matters, which is to sever citizenship from the U.S. definition of tax residency. In other words, people shouldn't be taxed because of the circumstances of their birth. Are you kidding me? You were born in the United States, therefore the rest of your life the U.S. has some claim on you? No. People should be taxed based on the circumstances of their life. Do they, have the kind of physical connection, whatever, the United States that would justify a taxation? Now, I'm sure that as a general principle, Barack Obama would agree with that. My guess is that when it came to taxation, say, oh, well, that's somehow different. Well, no, it's not different. Okay, you just don't like the result of it, in one particular case, right?
And so we have one proposal that's sort of working its way through the system. Where exactly is it at right now?
When you say where it's at, do you mean what has been done, or do you mean where to find it, or what do you mean? I'll answer both.
Yeah, I guess a little bit of everything.
So, it's pretty clear that 2025 is going to be a major year for tax reform, and the Heritage Group is very active in, putting together their proposals for what that tax reform should be. And Republicans overseas has taken this proposal and got it in along with that group of things. And this is the group that, is working hard to, provide the blueprints, the changes for either a new Republican administration or, their 2 cents worth, whatever, for any administration. And, I know that I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of this, okay, but I mean, it seems fairly clear that there's a reasonable chance, at least, that the Republicans are going to win the next election. Okay,
Hmm.
it's not guaranteed, but anybody who would discount it, I think is severely disconnected from reality. Right? Maybe they don't, but so this is important. It's in there now. In terms of where to find it, if you were to go to republicansoverseas.com and fish around there a little bit, you will find it, the exact proposal. Or if you were to go to the Twitter handle REP Overseas Tax, you will find it. Okay, just by kind of looking around there.
Awesome. And what's the next step for the proposal?
Well, what's the next step for the pro? Well, I mean, the proposal's in. I mean, I guess the next step would be, responding, A, improving it internally, B, responding to, any queries from, Heritage or anybody else. I mean, there are two additional things that I personally think are important. So a move to residency-based taxation, and I want to define that as severing citizenship from tax residency. And by the way, abolishing FATCA, we're in the 2016 platform of the Republican Party.
Mhm.
2020, they didn't change the platform, so it remained in there. I do not know whether it is, I'm not sure there is a final Republican platform for 2024 and what the status of it is. But the first point is that I think it's important that those two things, the repeal of citizenship taxation and FATCA, remain in the party platform. I think that's an important thing. The second thing, though, and this is my idea, so I mention that only because I don't want to tag Republicans overseas with this idea unless they agree. But my view of this is that because so much of this can be changed by regulation, that I think that individual Americans abroad through Republicans overseas ought to work towards getting a commitment from an incoming administration, which is technical
Mm.
talk for if Trump wins the election, okay,
Mhm.
that he would appoint a Treasury Secretary who would commit to making these changes through regulation. In other words, maybe we can't get the law changed, but okay, clearly we know the Treasury, because they already have, right? It's their view that they have the regulatory authority to define individual.
Mhm.
So we would look for a commitment from a Republican president to appoint a Treasury Secretary that would define individual through regulation as resident and not citizenship, right? So I think those are two additional things that, probably would strengthen the cause here.
Mhm.
But again,
Eh,
those are John Richardson thoughts on a Wednesday afternoon. They are not, as far as I can see, any thoughts adopted by Republican Overseas Tax Group yet.
No, I get it. I get it. And I imagine really like every big country has some sort of organization for Americans abroad, right? There's probably Americans in Australia, Americans in France. Are you guys kind of going around to all these different organizations and trying to get them on board?
Well, the answer to your first question is yeah. Okay, I've got to tell you, I think Democrats abroad is much more organized than that. And they have their own, they've rep Democrats abroad Australia, Democrats abroad Canada, and they try to do that, but they are not, and I think they should, commit to the goal of severing citizenship from tax residency. My understanding is that at the moment that's at best a long-term goal. Okay, not a current goal, which I personally think is a mistake. But yeah, they're doing that, and the approach of Republicans overseas is similar. Uh, they have chapter leaders in different countries, et cetera. So, I mean, the idea is, here's the proposal that we're trying to work with and sort of downloading that proposal through the world, right, through the various chapter leaders. But,
Yeah, I mean, if you got every major expat organization on board, that would be, that would be representing millions of people.
Vance, I agree with you, but the interesting thing about this is, and I really hate to say this, but at the present time, its only seat in Republicans' overseas tax that is going for the jugular, trying to remove the cancerous tumor of citizenship taxation. These other groups are, just trying to make it better. And, we're hoping that by articulating a very clear and specific vision here, that, we can sell this to individuals who will understand the logic of this and gradually, bring everybody into alignment with this as the goal. Because I agree with you, at least I think what I heard you imply, was that you need support, and you need support for a clearly defined goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the present time, I think that individual Americans abroad are very, very divided on this. I mean, there's a whole range of ideas. Some of them don't care at all. Some of them believe in citizenship taxation. Some of them are unhappy with it because they have a specific problem. If they get their problem solved, they don't care about anything else. I mean, of your group, digital nomads, let me ask you, I mean, what would be their attitude towards this? Right now, I mean, I think a lot of them are benefiting big time from the existing system, right? The foreign earned income exclusion, that.
I think everyone would be down. I mean, I still think everyone would be down. I mean, the FEIE is good, but it's not nearly as good as being able to just switch your tax residency like Canadians and Europeans can.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I mean, because I think that, this is a large, constituency of, I think generally younger people, et cetera. But I mean, you know, citizenship taxation is absolutely idiotic and cannot benefit anybody in the world, right?
Yeah.
But because a lot of people have lived their whole life under the US tax system, there is a group of people who think they'd be damaged by a change, right? And any change, is perceived to affect some people negatively. So, for example, you get, oh, I mean, we've talked about this before, right? But, people who've worked their whole life in the US, they have Social Security, maybe a pension, they decide that, they have trouble living in the United States on that level of income, so they move outside the United States somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're very much threatened by the idea of changing the tax system in this way because they're afraid that, that because they weren't in the United States, they'd be treated as non-resident aliens and therefore have higher taxes on their income, right? So it's not that they think that citizenship taxation is a good thing. It's that they're afraid of a change to the existing tax system at that particular stage in their life, right? So, it's tough. And you've also got, I mean, this stuff is hugely complex. I mean, even the people who know a lot about it, I think, are nothing but students of it, right? It's so complicated.
The problem is just that the US isn't really doing much in terms of zapping laws and deleting laws. Like Elon Musk has kind of been advocating for this, just like we need to start deleting laws. And that really hasn't started the movement of just deleting laws, which would be great. So
That's absolutely right, Vance. That's absolutely right. And that's particularly true in the area of tax law, right? We have all
yeah.
these duplicated laws. I mean, the US is a country, they love their laws. The more the better. The older the better, the more outrageous the better. Because somehow, the outrageousness, the length of these things prove the enduring viability of a country that strangled itself by too many laws and regulations. I mean, it is a very bad situation in the United States. And leaving aside the tax laws, I think this the sheer volume of laws, regulations, I think it basically strangled the country. I mean, you've got a
Yeah,
system where, I mean, part of the problem, and going back to the tax thing for a minute, is that nobody even knows what they're required to do.
yeah,
What you have is, to navigate the U.S. tax system is to be confronted with a system where, the penalty is very, very certain that you're going to get a major penalty, but for what? Nobody can figure it out. So, it's a terrible system of certain of definite penalties for undefinite or indefinite conduct, right? And
mhm,
I mean, what do you do about it? I mean, I think that there's the problem with too many laws, but there's also the problem of the way laws are made. You know, I I do not think that I don't think that I think they need to get rid of omnibus bills, right? I mean, so many of these tax laws come in as, part of a broader bill. That's the first thing. So, congressmen don't even know what's in them, right? They get these
mhm.
thousands of pages of laws. They don't know what's in this stuff, obviously. They just sort of sign off on it. But the thing that's most criminal about this, and I'm going to use the word criminal, is this. But I'm going to ask you a question before I give you this example. Do you think that people ought to know what a law says in terms of what people are required to do? Do you think that would be a desirable feature?
I don't think I understand the question.
Do you think that if somebody passes a law, you ought to be able to understand what the law is telling you have to do or prohibiting you from doing?
Oh, it's certainly all too complicated. Yeah, I mean,
Okay, so the way they make the laws, right, is that they never include, what they do is they say, well, we're going to amend this law, we're going to take out this word and add this word in this section. But what they never show you is what the result of the amendment is, right? There's never a clear statement. And by the way, after all these changes have been made, here's how the law will read. They don't do this. And I believe, the bottom of my heart, okay, that this is absolutely immoral. And that anytime a law,
right. It's almost like they're committing code, but then they're not testing the final product
that's a
to
good way of
see
putting it.
if the new code, if there's still no bugs and if the website's working properly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, something like the Internal Revenue Code is like a website from the 90s that's been amended, for
Yeah, the 60s.
30 years. And it,
Well,
it doesn't work. And you can't.
that is, yeah, John, this is kind of all we have time for today. We actually went a couple minutes over because I know you're a ranter. And so I know we just got to cut it short now. Otherwise, but in any case, people will have to get in touch with you. We talked about how things are super, super complicated. If you're a digital nomad looking to take advantage of the foreigner and income exclusion, you have a relatively simple case. Feel free to get in touch with My Latin Life. If you are a millionaire or you have a much more complicated situation, I highly recommend that you get in touch directly with John Richardson. He's one of the absolute experts for Americans abroad, and he'll set you straight, whether it comes to renunciation or filing back taxes or any number of things. So, John, do you want to hit us with just a quick final message? I mean, all the links will be in the show notes where they can get in touch with you, but I'll give you the last word.
Well, no, I think I'll just adopt your last word. Okay, your last word was great. And, let's connect again. We see how this thing progresses. Thanks very much, Vance.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all your advocacy work and what you're doing on behalf of Americans abroad. It's very much needed, and so we appreciate all your hard work. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, my guest today, John Richardson, back again. Links in the show notes. You can get in contact with him. And by the way, to the listener, wherever you're listening to this, maybe it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, X, please be sure you're subscribed. Be sure to leave a review, drop a comment, let us know you enjoyed the episode. And we drop 2 episodes a week, so you won't want to miss any of our episodes with amazing guests. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. Introducing Rolf Haltza's Paycheck Multiplication Layering Method, a revolutionary approach that redefines the traditional career path. This is Rolf's new Done With You program, where he'll work with you to implement job stacking for yourself. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, are you ready to step out of the shadows of job insecurity and step into a world of career abundance? Then just click the link in the description of this episode, book a call with Rolf, and start walking the path of unleashing your earning potential with job stacking.